there's three things we look at. There's, of course, what impact have you done by yourself? That's one thing. So you just did 1 out of 3. You maxed that 1 out of 3. Mathematically, that's not very good. The second thing we look at is how have you helped others? And the third thing we look at is what did you do with the help you got from others? Really interesting cycle.
Hello and welcome to the Working From Home podcast. I'm your host, Nelson Jordan, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Shaaz Nasir. Shaaz is the Director of Digital Transformation at Microsoft and co-founder of Mind This magazine. Shaaz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem at all. Just to give people a bit of a background before we jump into Shaaz's role, Shaaz and I actually went to school together for a very, very short period of a couple of years when we were both younger and completely different. But it's we've been able to reconnect for the podcast. So that's +1 in the podcast positives column for sure. Shaaz, what is digital transformation?
It's a great question that everyone I think is asking these days. I think it really comes down to simply looking at your business or looking at your company or looking at your government and just asking yourself, what role does technology play in trying to get things done a lot quicker? And then the second question is that transformation part. Like, who are you and what do you want to be for the future? So I think those two things are critical and kind of understand what is digital transformation. I view it as a verb. It's like something you do. It's something who you are.
Okay, and who does that? Is that companies? Is that individuals? Is that governments?
It's really across the gamut. Everyone across industries are trying to figure out who really does this. When I first started up, I would say it probably started within the chief technology office domain, whether that's in the private sector or that's in the government. Usually the person that owns the keys to technology would usually drive that type of transformation. Before, it was kind of more of an IT focus centric effort where, we need to upgrade our computers, we need to shift to the cloud, perhaps migrate a few apps. But then as time went on and as more business folks began to see the value of technology, that's when the lines began blurring. And you saw roles like chief digital officer come around where the person doesn't need to have an immensely technical aptitude, but rather be the bridge between the business world and the technology world. And that runs through government as well, around the CTO level, sometimes even the CFO, the chief financial officer, would sometimes want to begin to use technology to find places where they can increase revenue or decrease their risk.
Mm-hmm. So for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that sounds like a bit of a change from that tactical outlook to more of a strategic one. Does that ring true?
Absolutely. IT transformation is always critical. It's always important. But the conversation has kind of moved on from, providing laptops or upgrading your mice or, introducing better keyboards to more about what are we as an organization and then what role can technology really play to help transform us. Maybe we need to enter new markets. Maybe we need to serve new people if you're the government. So it's really more strategic in terms of really existential almost, where you're kind of always asking, who are we? What are we? Where are we trying to go in the next 2 years?
Mm-hmm. What sort of entities do you typically work with in terms of governments versus private companies? Is there a mix or is it skewed towards one in particular?
Yeah, so at Microsoft, I'm with the state and local government team. So as the director of digital transformation, I focus on helping governments at a state level or province level and a city level. So working with the mayor's office or working with the governor or premier's office based on what country you're in. I am solely based and focusing on helping the US right now. That's where our team is focused on. So I usually come in and work with senior executives, but honestly, I'll work with anyone who needs the help. It doesn't really matter. But yes, there's usually a senior executive that's in the play for the project. It could be ranging from 2 to 4 weeks to sometimes 1 year plus, depending on the type of engagement. But usually we're brought in when either the chief digital officer or even the commissioner of an agency really wants to change something. That's kind of when hopefully they say we need Microsoft to come in here and kind of provide that nexus between business transformation and technology transformation. I think that's the difference of people, I'm sure right now, wondering, this doesn't Accenture do this, or don't other folks do this? I mean, they do in their own ways. I think every company has their own advantage. With Microsoft, at least, we can kind of bring you the full end to end. So I can come in with the strategy, but eventually it will end with someone, if you choose to, hands-on keyboards, coding, creating that AI cognitive service. We have a massive partnership ecosystem as well that we can leverage. So that's kind of it's a new team, it's a new role. It's been around for a few years. I think it was underneath Satya, our CEO's new mandate, to kind of really bring about that digital growth mindset. And this is where that role kind of came to life.
Mm-hmm. That sounds interesting. So is it maybe the CTO or kind of somebody that's quite senior in an organization encounters a problem? Is that when the kind of red flags are raised and they say, okay, well, this can't happen again? Or is it more like, okay, now we've got to step back, we need to think how we're going to compete with X, Y, and Z from a private company level? Or how are we going to be able to offer this, and this to the people in our region from a government level?
Absolutely. So usually it's a mix of being reactive and proactive. So within government states, they usually review their strategy every year. They have hundreds of really top tier bureaucrats grinding through the strategy. What's the vision? Who are we trying to be? How are we trying to serve people? And then often younger folks are the ones that kind of come in and say, have you considered this technology? Or have you considered crowdsourcing ideas? That they're the ones that kind of begin bubbling some of that interesting, different, look at what other countries are doing. Are we doing this? And that kind of begins to percolate from the bottom up. But then there's also, of course, top down on the government side, where there's a new CIO or there's a new CTO or there's a new commissioner that wants to make their mark, and they come from the private sector and they kind of know about what digital transformation is all about. So they begin asking those questions. Why is it that our team only does 1, 2, and 3? Is there a way that all 14 of our agencies can work together? On the private sector side, it's a lot more benchmarking, I would assume, for their competitors. Really, everyone knows the Netflix, for example, used to ship out DVDs, and now obviously they're an online platform for multiple content. So that's just a short sign of how they kind of re-envisioned themselves across the lines. So it's always massive competition. Tesla's another great example of treating the car as not just a vehicle, but really as a data generation machine, and then being the manager of that data as a company. Again, that's transforming the role of vehicles and transforming the role of manufacturing. I think Ford now declares itself as a technology company that builds cars. It's a very interesting nuanced shift in how they approach things. So yeah, that's usually the how it kind of comes about.
And what projects are you typically engaged on? Obviously, you gave some examples kind of across the board there. Netflix, that was kind of a strategy and a business model change. And then obviously via a new platform. And then again, you've kind of listed business strategy there. Do you tend to get involved mainly on the strategic level in terms of saying, okay, this is the objective, this is how you should get there as a company or a part of government? Or is it more on, they've already decided on a particular objective and a way to get there, and then you're, okay, this is the way that we make it happen, or a mix of both?
It really is a mix of both. I think in terms of the government, what happens is different agencies and different government institutions have a lot of great technology already. And then they begin asking, how do we increase adoption? And then that leads to, why aren't people maybe using the most that we have? And then that leads to, I think it's a cultural thing. Sure. And then that's when hopefully either my colleagues who are more focused on technology would say, oh, we need to bring in a digital advisor or director of digital transformation to kind of come in here and talk about that culture. That's kind of when we come in and say, okay, increasing adoption is great, and using your tools makes sense. You made that investment, but what are you trying to do? Like, are 100% people using Microsoft Teams is a wonderful output, but in terms of an outcome, I assume you're trying to increase collaboration, which is a cultural attribute rather than a technological ability. So then
The
let's think about
technology is there
what
to
can we
act.
do.
Sorry, the technology is there to
Exactly.
act as the facilitator. It's not a goal unto
Mhm.
itself. It's a tool.
Exactly. And that's kind of where our team comes in and really helps the whoever working with at the agency level to really think about, what is your roadmap? Like, what is your 3 to 4 year technology roadmap? What do you already have? And then let's see how we can help your employees, kind of empower them to kind of really use the most out of these tools, but more importantly, build a certain culture. Or maybe you already have a culture and you just never thought of it that way. So then now we're introducing the CTO with the head of HR. And maybe they never talked before, but the head of HR has their own massive employee empowerment program, but never talked about Microsoft Teams or never mentioned any of those solutions in there. So it's kind of interesting how we come in sometimes and just act as a catalyst. Because most of the time, these are really smart people and they know what they're doing. It's just that they're so focused on the here and now because of crazy things are happening around the world, such as COVID, that sometimes it's hard to kind of think, are other people doing this already, or how are we connecting the dots? As an advisor, we're kind of there in that role to really help them out that way.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to give us some concrete examples of projects that you've worked on? Because I find like a concept such as digital transformation can kind of remain as this almost airy-fairy concept that's quite hard to actually think about what it is in a material fashion. So maybe in a project or two as an example would be really useful.
Sure, absolutely. 100%. And I won't be able to mention the names per se for
Of course.
privacy reasons, but I'll definitely go as detailed as possible. So let's say there's a central IT organization and they're really used to kind of controlling the leaders and controlling the tools that other agencies have to use. So it's kind of very a centralized sense of operating your technology stack. That if you're 50 different agencies and you have 50 different requests, you all have to come to me, the central IT department, for me to determine when to use what. Now that sounds good, it sounds safe and secure, and it can be in many different cases. But as you can imagine, it's hard to be agile with that type of structure in place. When you have 50 different agencies with their own demands, let's say you have an agency that focuses on people with disabilities, and you have an agency that focuses on youth, and then you have another agency that's focused maybe on aging. Those 3 agencies should be able to work together like this. They probably have very similar mission statements, but they can't because they have different subscriptions, different tools, and they have to somehow, submit the procurement process internally, not even externally, to really get that going. And it takes a year or 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. There's backlog. It's not effective, and then just push and pull. So what's happening, at least one of the projects I've done, is really sit down with certain executives at that IT department and talk about what ways can we decentralize this power in a way that, let's say, shifting to Azure, those data centers that are not necessarily not really generating revenue. It's revenue, so you might as well shift that into an Azure cloud or maybe a hybrid cloud solution, depending on what you want to do. So you really sit down and say, okay, if you do want to go to Azure, or maybe you want to use a bit of on-premises, your own data center and Azure, okay, let's develop a whole plan for that. Let's develop a really, adoption, a lot of change management, a lot of culture adoption in there. But then let's also think about what those 3 agencies are trying to do. And then let's bring them into the solution. So that's a tactile thing that we did was while we're working on the Azure cloud strategy, we also brought in those 3 different agencies to really think about what are you all trying to do? What if your 5 MVPs could have been 1? And you could maybe develop, let's just say, a certain service that helps youth who are feeling lonely, connect them with older folks who are feeling lonely as well, and then tie those 2 different initiatives with perhaps the Ministry of Culture that you're working with that's looking for people to share the culture and data information with, programs. So that's kind of like a tactile thing we've done. I mean, do people go around saying digital transformation? Like, no one goes, this is DT. But it's really at the end of the day of, okay, changing the business model of how that IT organization functioned, but then also thinking about the end user or the citizen and how they experience those three different agencies, and then really tying it all together in a massive program of change where we develop roadmaps that say, okay, you want to do these 5 things because the prime minister or the president wants that. This is how you're going to do it. By the way, you were already halfway there. It was just that you weren't communicating with each other. So let's deploy, or let's actually, sometimes they even buy the products, but they choose to turn them off for fear of whatever reason. So we come in and say, there's going to be afraid of these things. You're literally paying for them. Let's turn on some of these features and we'll help you kind of build those innovation hubs internally. So then I'm not needed per se. So it's kind of, we're not trying to just come here and latch onto you for a 50-year engagement. It's more about, let's figure out what your business problems are. Let's figure out how to reduce your costs as a government because of, COVID and all these different trying things. But then let's also remember that the government can be the largest source of innovation for any city. It's thanks to the government we went to the moon. It's thanks to the government we have the internet. Mm-hmm. The initial early investment from the Pentagon kind of led to the internet. So I often always challenge when folks say, government can't do anything. It's too slow. It's too old. And yeah, if you keep calling something slow and old, it tends to just remain that way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many things to unpack here. So just bear with me for a little while because that's an extremely good answer. So on the very last thing you said, just because that's front of mind, yeah, government does get obviously some stick, and for a lot of times it is for good reasons. Let's not pretend otherwise. In terms of this, though, the interesting thing for me isn't to get lost on like what government's supposed to be about and isn't for different cultures in different countries and things like that. It's to say that sometimes governments can commit to projects that private companies can't, because private companies by and large are focused on being profitable. Governments don't necessarily have to do that. They can commit to things that don't make money, actually will never make money, but actually act as a source of information and new products and new services and just general innovation that then gets used by private companies and kind of improves the whole system. So they can take on just different scope of projects. Just going back, though, that one of the other things that I found really interesting with what you were saying is it seemed to me that there were so many different things coming along when you mentioned things like the technological change, but also like the mindset change that was quite inherent in that conversation and that project example. Because I can imagine, just with some of the encounters that I've had, that yes, you might be able to get the agencies on board by pointing out the objectives that they're going to be able to achieve by working together with that sense of collaboration and gathering people for like the ideation stage of these processes. Totally get that, because it's so much more obvious to them the gain. What do you face on the other side from the people that are effectively might see it as giving up a form of control, i.e., the central IT hub who used to have all this control, all this say-so of what happened because of that, the centralized nature of things?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. It really comes down to what you want to do and what you want to be as a central IT organization. So if you're usually the senior execs really do understand the need to evolve, and I'm not saying everyone's to be decentralized. There's usually a nice mix between the two. But it's quite often those sometimes who are stuck in the middle of the org chart that are just not incentivized or are afraid or are not empowered to really embrace that change because they've been doing something for the last 20, 30 years. And now you're saying I need to go to a cloud environment and I need to refactor all my apps. I need to reimagine the business workflows of how I manage things. And now you're telling me I need to do Azure DevOps. That takes 5 of my people and turns them to almost in terms of like 15 in terms of the quality of output, because now they're working a bit more agile rather than the waterfall approach. This is a lot of change, and this is going to change my life, at least my work life. Like, this is intense. So you tend to kind of hold off on that and kind of hold on to the processes that you've mastered and that have worked in their defense. Hey, we're functioning, we're functioning. We're people are using our services. Things are working. For those folks, it comes down to understanding and empathizing that, imagine if your whole life just turned upside down and your job description just completely got reinvented. For some, that's frightful. Not everyone has a growth mindset, only because sometimes it's a bit of a luxury to have a growth mindset because you're stable and you have income that's coming in. You have a happy, healthy household. So taking those bold risks definitely kind of create kind of anxiety almost. But again, we work with the IT. It sounds like we don't come in with a hammer and decentralize the whole thing. It's more of, okay, let's, for example, we do use a methodology called ProSci, change management methodology, the ADKAR model. Won't nerd out into that, but there are tools and methodologies that turn those folks into some folks that really are part of the solution rather than kind of against it. And quite often they have the knowledge and skill. Like, they're very useful. One thing that they don't understand is that, like, when I come in, I'm not like, you're all very useful people. You all have immense knowledge and skill and history for the last 20, 30 years I don't have. However, let's take that intelligence and remold it into something that ensures that at the end of the day, the right agency gets the right technology so that humans can get the right services. So be on the right side of history and control the narrative in a way that now you are able to more effectively deal out services at a much higher rate. Because at the end of the day, working for the government, it's a calling to public service. It's something that, you could probably go make a lot more money if you would go to the private sector. So it's a calling. It's an honor. And you have to really respect that and why they're there, rather than coming in just saying, use these fancy methodologies, you're all useless. Like, that's not, other companies definitely like to go down that route, but at least luckily I've been fortunate throughout my life where I don't need, like, that's not my approach. And that's not Microsoft's approach. We're definitely more of a learned all rather than a know-it-all type of company. In the last few years, we've shifted our approach into terms of that. But that's really what it is. Let's not view them as laggards or view them as people who are anti-change. It's more of folks who are afraid of their job security, or maybe don't understand what we're saying, or maybe just don't want to change and they need to understand, why not? Like, what are the benefits of the status quo? And let's incorporate that on our 5-year journey.
So within your remit, it sounds like you're not just talking to the top level people, you're also working with those in kind of middle management and down to make sure that they're all on board as well and they're empowered to do so. Is that right?
Absolutely. Again, like, our team works with anyone that wants to get things done for the public service. If you're a junior analyst, if you're a senior, we at Microsoft, we're not I'm a director, I can only talk to C-level. I hang out with everyone. Before COVID, obviously, anyone at any level, I don't care. You're all hard workers. You're all brilliant people. Let's all work together is usually our approach.
I want to change gears a little bit now, just because I know you and I have had conversations about this in the past. Given that your role is essentially to help people assess megatrends, things that are happening like right now, but more importantly, what's going to occur in the future and how they kind of prepare for those in terms of solutions and transformation. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, given that you mentioned COVID there. Yeah. So what's your kind of take on it?
COVID has really, in the last 7 months, we've seen probably 3 years of transformation. The amount of calls we're getting across the country from state and local to really figuring out how do we develop and push out an employment insurance system within days, not years. How do we all of a sudden empower 30,000 people to work from home where we've never even let them allowed to take their laptop at home? Some of these folks don't even have laptops. So what are you going to do? Take the physical tower home? So it really has been the tech intensity of governments across the states and of course the world has been accelerated by 1,000 million percentile. The thing there is that it's both presents exciting times. Or oh, this is wonderful. Executives are now empowered by those who control the budgets to now go off. Okay, here is the money that you need to kind of go off and really make the most out of Microsoft Office and the whole 365 suite. Here's where you can invest with, Surface laptops for everyone. That's all great. That's great. And that's step one in terms of you got to rebound. And then you kind of need to, well, first you need to respond, if you will, and then rebound and then reimagine is the flow. And quite frankly, everyone's doing all three at the same time. So that's kind of COVID has kind of also forced everyone to think about what's the future like. Working from home, as an example, is a massive change for many people. I know folks working at home right now listening to this podcast, but I've been doing this for years. It's not a big deal. But for the government, I've definitely, and I'll switch gears where I worked for the government, Government of Canada and different agencies. I had great experiences. It was an honor across the board. But there's definitely were some conversations many years ago where you can see those senior executives being just not connecting. Like, what do you mean? You're going to take your laptop and work at home? Who's watching you? How will the little manager walk around, walk the halls, talk? How would you ever communicate with other people? It seems like a guaranteed way of siloing you off. What's the internet quality like? Who pays for the internet? All these sort of questions come up. And so those certain executives have kind of come around to this reality. And this is kind of like a really forced MVP on working from home for multiple governments where they have to. It's not a choice. You're not going to give everyone COVID to come to work. So we've seen a lot of different governments really show that they can be fast, that they can be agile, and that, thousands of different government employees across America, if not tens of thousands actually, are now working at home safely, securely. I mean, but not all perfectly, of course. It's a learning curve. And I do miss going to the office. I miss talking to people. But the one mega trend for sure is that working from home is not just going to be a COVID only thing. And then we all get our vaccines, hopefully, and then we're at 100% back to the office. I don't think that's going to happen. At the same time, I don't think we're forever going to be working from the home. But if you're a government executive and you're looking at, let's say maybe you own buildings, you own actual buildings that house tens of thousands of people, like, can we sell some of that and then kind of offload those costs, those hard fixed costs that we need to keep getting, and then reinvest it into something else that's a bit more productive, and maybe create offices that are more not open offices because they have issues as well, but a hybrid between cubicle and open. So those are type of structural changes that are coming right now, where certain governments would be selling some of their buildings for good and then reinvesting the money into newer offices that encourage healthier and happier workplace. I definitely see that as being one of the biggest trends. Now, I do see a nuance between the public sector and private sector. Certainly, I can't speak to every sector, but I definitely see pushback from banks across the board. They really want you to show up. They really believe in showing up, working those long hours. Not all banks, well, the culture is still ingrained. It's the culture changed more than a technology issue. You gotta be here.
Just to clarify, Shaaz, when you're talking about banks, do you mean in terms of headquarters or the real kind of top finance, or are you talking in terms of the consumer-facing bank branches?
Mixture. I'm mainly talking about those big headquarters that house 20 to 30,000 people. Commercial banks, in terms of your bank tellers, that change has been happening for a while with apps, with online services, with things like Wealthsimple, and that's a whole other beast of itself that's already happening. But in terms of the headquarters, those who thought they were, not touched by digital transformation are now kind of having this tug of war. Where a lot of folks are saying, I can, as an investment banker, I can work from home and do it quite effectively. While others are, no, the numbers are down, engagement is down. Again, I would like to invite those folks that say things are down to what are these KPIs you're measuring? If you're still very well functioning as a team if the investment banker is happy in his or her life and your results are still being secured, so then what are these KPIs that are indicating something's going wrong? So that's another, sometimes people overanalyze these numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Someone did, you haven't logged into your computer for 14 hours a day. That's a negative. I'm like, is it a negative? I don't, has the person got the work done? Yes or no? If no, then yeah, okay, here we go. We got a problem here. But if yes, then to me, it's basic math. Like, that's productivity increasing. It's literally the definition of productivity, where you can work a bit less, but get the same amount of stuff done. Like, that's a good thing, and we all celebrate. Well, the government on the flip side, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking there about just like hangovers from old cultural assumptions and cultural expectations as well within certain industries. I'm thinking of, and you'll know it quite well, I guess, with your background, but companies like investment banking, industries like consulting, industries like law, where the expectation is, especially for the more junior members of staff, an insane amount of work. That's kind of part and parcel with the expectations there, in terms of working basically every hour under the sun, pulling all-nighters, being available 7 days a week. Those kind of things that I find personally ridiculous, but others might wear them as a badge of honor, especially if they're kind of on the partnership track. What, if any, have you seen kind of changes there? That must have been like a real difference.
I have a lot of friends who are consultants, and their lives have been completely transformed. For those listening, usually you're working 4 days or 5 days at a client site, which means you flew somewhere, and then you fly back for 2 days to your home, and then you do it again, and you do it for 4 weeks, and then sometimes I do it for 4 months. Depends on how your lifestyle is. And I used to work for Accenture Strategy, and it was a wonderful time in the Middle East, working in Abu Dhabi, a lot of smart city stuff, and I did that back and forth. It was great. I loved it. They got the points, it's exciting and fun. But eventually, if you keep working 100 hours or 80 hours a week, it's not the most sustainable. So I do see resistance in some firms. I do see a celebration in others, where they're kind of actually trying to create the hot desk, work from wherever you want. Who cares? If the client wants you to be here, then better be here. But otherwise, the main change I'm seeing is Generation Y, Generation Z, or Z, depending on who's listening. They, on average, would rather not work 100+ hours a week. They don't necessarily. I'm speaking high level on purpose, because some really do. That's fine, but it's not that. So many studies have shown that it's not the healthiest, nor is it the most productive. Like, it's one thing working a lot and trying to get a lot of things done and being the best you can be and outperforming everyone. Then there's another thing where it's a cultural thing. You have to work 100 hours. If you don't, something's wrong. So a lot of these, funny enough, some of the top tier consulting companies will push out white papers talking about productivity and work-life balance. I'm like,
completely ignore them.
Yeah, this is great. You've proven this. This is wonderful. Let's turn around and apply it to yourselves. So I do see law firms are also definitely changing based on the type of law you're doing. At the end of the day, if you are in an industry that does charge per hour, it's going to be hard to really transform that business model. But we are seeing different companies, I guess, again, like I speak to Accenture, maybe perhaps Deloitte, they are trying to really think about work-life balance. Work-life infusion, I guess, is the new phrase a lot of folks use these days. But change is coming in that industry, just simply because like Gen Y and Gen Z make up the majority of the workforce in America now. That's a lot. The strength in numbers. The reason why 70% of the people who leave their jobs, usually because of their direct line manager. And if you dig deeper into that stat, at least in America, you could probably pinpoint work-life balance being one of the biggest issues, or work-life infusion. So that's just something to take in mind. So the whole world around us right now is changing. And in the next, fast forward 10 years, people will say that this year and these last, let's say 2018 to 2022 was the inflection point. whatever massive changes come in how we work.
Mm. Now, I remember seeing some stats, and this is a few years ago, to take things with a pinch of salt, but about the number of hours that Americans in general worked versus the actual productivity, and the numbers were not good.
No, the
There was a scary
OECD,
amount worked, and people skipping on not taking their vacation days, and all these kind of ridiculous things from
the
English perspective. That's all.
I don't know, of course, the majority of, and these are all, you can go into the OECD website, read all these stats, but it's safe to say at a high level, the majority of Americans don't take the majority of their vacation days. That's just a very general, it's on average, it's what it is, which is not healthy. It doesn't lead to a healthy lifestyle. I mean, the rates of obesity are quite high in America. Healthcare system isn't the best it can be based on the investment we're making in it. It doesn't take a super genius to see like, things aren't working. I mean, if you look at France, actually, it's one of the most productive countries in the world. And everyone always laughs at France, like, oh, those guys just take breaks all the time. Like,
yeah,
okay.
It's a fun example to use because I own a company in France that imports imports to the marine industry rope products basically for yachts. Wow. And we don't get anything done in August. Like the whole of August, nothing. Maybe half of July is gone as well, and a bit of September. We can't get hold of anyone. Like the outbound sales just doesn't exist, and like our emails go unread. Like nothing happens, and people don't really believe this unless you've been to France for a holiday, or even to Spain for the similar period. It's that period of like July to beginning of September. Everybody leaves the city. Everyone goes on holiday. Everyone takes holiday at the same time. You know?
And they're more productive. I know folks are listening, like, what's going to, they're actually the OECD again, neutral organization, slice and dice all the data sets, the best minds in the world, and they keep coming up with the same conclusion. Like, they're overall a more productive society. So then again, those are the type of mega trends that are coming. I think when Gen Y is kind of getting older, they're getting the managerial positions, the VP positions, some. Like we are, I think that's going to be the second lever of massive change. Of course, there's technology, but then there's people with the right mindset now having power. Some will revert back to, they want to be like the boomers, they want to be like Gen X, the whole different psychology in terms of why. But you will get a significant chunk that will remember how it was when they were a junior analyst getting yelled at for not working 130 hours. They go, I'm going to do things differently.
Yeah, it reminds me of that particular attitude of, and keep in mind that 99% of my knowledge about America comes from TV sitcoms. So just that's the caveat. But it reminds me of like the hazing that you see at universities, or we see through TV at universities and colleges, as you guys call them. But it's that, well, we went through it. So like, we're going to put these guys who come after us through it as well.
A trial of passage, or whatever the phrase is. It's not healthy. And I do see certain cities and countries and companies within America that are trying to push unlimited vacation, which has its own interesting issues. It's more of a like a tax, not tax. What is it? If you are a startup and you give unlimited vacation, it means you don't need to hold the capital, the money that's needed if you give everyone 15 days holiday. Because if they cash out, you need to legally have the money reserved. It was a smart way to kind of release that money, invest in other things while still giving. And then you have to make sure that people actually do take the breaks, because some studies have shown that when you do that, it becomes like a chicken and an egg, or like you first, I'm so scared. Yeah. Which again, it's a result of not thinking through the culture. I think this last week, Mark Zuckerberg, we have Thanksgiving in November here in America. I think he gave the whole week off just due to COVID, and it's like breaking. Everyone's going crazy. The media's like, "Oh my god, this is wild. He's like a genius." Like, I mean, I'm sure, of course, he is a genius, but like, this is common human decency that if all your workers are already overworking, and you have like 2 days off and you're maybe traveling or hopefully, safely within COVID, it just makes sense to give an extra 3 days. And he himself says, I want my employees to recharge, to come back stronger and more refreshed. It's just business sense. It's not like some magical move. It's pretty common. You'll make the money back. As cold as that sounds, you will in productivity gains.
It's we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit, but the thing that keeps coming back to me is that so many of these issues around kind of expectations and holiday and work-life balance are elements of culture. So I kind of see that those companies that form now as remote companies might have a bit of an advantage moving forward if this remains. What do you think about that?
Definitely. I think everyone's thinking about, if you were going to start a business today, what technology stack would you use? How would you set up the corporation, quote unquote? How would you set up the work culture? The answers are very different from versus 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So I definitely hopefully see. And also, I mean, the average entrepreneur is around 44. Like, it's not, we like this, we see like the cool young folks. Oh man, they're like, I want to be an entrepreneur. A 22-year-old making it big with the hoodie. Like, the average entrepreneur is 44. Another sad fact, I would say, I think in Canada and America, entrepreneurship is at an all-time low in the last 30 to 40 years, which is my head. I'm like, what do you mean? It's incorrect data. And I was like, no, it's right. Like in the 50s, 60s, owning a small business, that was it was just more entrepreneurial spirit back then based on how many small businesses were opened and remained open versus now. So again, degree in economics, you can slice the data to tell any story you want, but at least what we can safely say is it's not that everyone is having their own business right now and the whole world is completely changing. It's a bit more nuanced than that. But I do feel that even with some of the technology companies or any big, massive Fortune 500 companies, when they're hiring people, they are hiring people who have their own business. And then that kind of practice and culture bleeds in. And it's a fascinating time, I think, that thanks to COVID and the atrocity of that, what that is, and then the generational, Gen Y and Z and their expectations. I really think like we're at, again, fast forward to the next 10 years, when you look back at this point, this is the inflection point where a lot of things changed.
I'm writing a post about like what it means to be a freelance copywriter in 2020, which is what I am. I'm a conversion copywriter and digital marketer. So one of the things that I'm trying to wrestle with at the moment is it's very interesting that you mentioned kind of the lack of entrepreneurship there in terms of what the actual stats versus what we feel like. So if you told me that stat and you were like, I could easily say that that's probably not the case on an anecdotal level, because it feels like there's more people doing things and opening their own businesses. And from a freelance perspective in the US, I think you're at about like 38 to 40% of people like are considered freelancers at this stage. And I think I read a study the other day for this post I'm writing about the fact that they think it's going to be like 50% by 2027, and this was before COVID was done. So I'm thinking, okay, could be a potential huge growth area. But I think it's very important how we define a freelancer. So it's very, very different a freelancer like me. So somebody who has chosen to be a freelancer of their own volition, had plenty of other job opportunities, but decided this is what they want to pursue. And somebody who is a freelancer kind of because they've been forced to, they've either been made redundant or their company, from a legal perspective, views them as a freelancer because then they don't have to provide a certain amount of benefits. What I haven't seen anybody slice the data down into making this distinction between these types of freelancers. So I want to know, who are the people who are actually kind of out there because of the freedom it gives, the earning potential it gives, versus those that I don't,
Like contract work.
I don't want this to come off poorly by saying like they've been forced into it, but they're almost some of them are almost at a position of vulnerability here.
They are. I think it's safe to say that. I mean, there's lots of different research papers out there saying it's a bit more extreme, but they're saying like this is like modern day slavery or a new version of capitalism gone wrong, where you have the freelancers who chose to be free versus the contract workers that have to get. They'll just take anything because their situation is rough, and certain employers would just say, "Okay, we won't make you a full time. We'll make you full time, but kind of like this contract thing. So we don't give you any health benefits, and we might give you a bit more money overall, so that pays for everything, but it doesn't in reality." So yeah, there's definitely labor capital discussions are hot, and I also haven't seen much data trying to break down those two.
No,
it's really hard to kind of get that data. It's challenging, but I think there needs to be some type of research in defining. You're exactly right. Like there's a key difference between someone who chooses to be a freelancer. Gets LLC, maybe contracts 2-3 workers around him and builds a nice startup that has a pipeline of work, and he or she can go live anywhere they want. Versus someone who just this is like a copious amounts of debt because of their degrees. Maybe has 2 kids and has a lifeline that will just at least keep the lights on, literally, as they try to figure out life. Like that's not entrepreneurship.
No, I think that's the key, isn't it? Breaking it down and making that distinction. And you're right. Like I've just not seen anybody that's done it in that space. I've seen people who have written research papers on things like 0 hours contracts in the UK. I'm not sure if is it the same terminology in the US?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, so I've seen research papers on that, which are really, really interesting. I know like a lot of industries have moved towards that model, sadly. And it tends to be the ones that harness kind of low salaried workers. Basically, they're the most vulnerable, and they're the ones that have the least say in management structure. So it makes sense that they're also the most they're the highest number within an organization. You tend to have way more junior people or people on low wages, depending on the business model, of course. But
absolutely, 100%. It's hard. I mean, the at least in America, the average American hasn't received a real wage increase in the last 30 to 40 years. I'm saying, and people are like, what's a real wage increase? Like, oh man, okay, it's like when you adjust for inflation, and like your paycheck is increasing every year, but quite frankly, it's not, because it's not worth as much as before as last year.
So that's like your salary is increasing, but inflation is eating away at it. Your healthcare costs you far more. Your education costs far more.
Here's a basic example. It's very basic, but you take any resume of the top 5 banks, the CEOs, just take them off LinkedIn, read them. They're obviously very smart people, the CEOs of these massive banks, but if they got they'll have 1 degree. They'll have, BE honors in XYZ, not banking, BE honors in something. And they worked hard and they struggled and they got to the top. 100% power to them. But if you took those resumes and you put it into their junior analyst program, none of them will get selected to their own bank that they're the CEO of. You need to get into debt by $350,000 to get into these programs, meaning you need to get a Harvard MBA or something MBA. Mm-hmm. And and ROI on those things are hard. It's challenging to say the least. So there's something off here where the general social contract within America, the whole idea of you work hard, you progress in life, play by the rules, at the end of your life, you'll be a winner. Social economic mobility is on a downward spiral in America, which is literally the definition of the American dream. Mm. It's wild to me that everyone's pay is decreasing. The cost of healthcare and education is through the roof. Your chances of the chances of your children succeeding you economically based on net worth is decreasing. Meaning your family line, if you think that way, will finish off poor on average. Like that's not healthy. It's not healthy for any economy, whether you support programs that fix this or not, or tax cuts or more government or less government. Putting all that aside, the nature of work isn't working, at least in America right now. And we all, state and local, across the whole gamut, we really need to have a real conversation about like what does this mean. And yes, digitally reskilling everyone is a great idea, and there are enough jobs for many folks. It's more of the skills gap. It's a valid argument, and it's a good initiative to have. And multiple companies, including Microsoft, are tripling down on that. Knowledge has never been more affordable and accessible. But at the end of the day, if some companies in some places, you got to get the fancy degrees, and those are still not the most accessible. Last, I guess, fun fact or whatever fact, at least in America and also Canada, 60 to 75% of all jobs are small businesses. They're not Walmarts. They're not like Facebook's, Microsoft's. Small businesses are driving most of this growth. So we need to pay attention to what makes a small business. How do we reduce the red tape around them to make sure they are, well functioning? At the same time, we also need to make sure that the small businesses are paying, are doing well enough that they can pay people the right money that they're worth. I think it's safe to say in a diplomatic way. It's not about. We really need to empower small business owners to make sure that they're so successful that they're paying their employees top dollar to make sure they live happy and holistic lives. We already know the example of Henry Ford and increasing his, pay for all the staff that got paid less, and people are buying more cars. It's very happy. The society is blooming. But there is truth to that. If you invest in your employees, you are investing in your customers, which will in return make a healthier, more secure society, and will help everyone be a bit more richer and a bit more stable in their lives.
So one of the things that has kind of occurred to me just when you were making that statement is this gap between essentially, I don't know what the phrase is used necessarily in the US, between kind of like, you call it like blue collar and white collar, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. I was afraid I was going to say something ridiculous then. And
No,
I've never heard that before in my life. No, but blue collar and white collar. And I think it's important to make the differentiation between those types of jobs that people actually can work from home in, and those that can't. And from what I've seen anyway, I'm not sure on what you've seen, but it seems to be the white collar jobs that are able to be done by and large from home on average, versus the blue collar jobs that they just don't have. They need, by their very nature, they require a physical presence.
100%.
So I'm kind of wondering what happens when remote working almost like not necessarily becomes the norm, but becomes like a bigger factor in general day-to-day life when COVID isn't here. If that's going to create some differences in what our cities look like versus our rural areas, what like our neighborhoods look like, whether there'll be, exodus from cities in really expensive areas when people start to realize that, hey, I could be somewhere with like triple the land or quadruple it and pay like half what I'm paying now. And I'm wondering if that's going to leave kind of a hollowing out of those neighborhoods, or if like real estate prices will adjust, rental prices will adjust to kind of meet this new normal. I think. What's your take on that? And I appreciate that's a huge question.
No, I love it. That's great. You're honestly, we're in the same wavelength where the digital divide is probably going to get a lot worse. And when I say digital divide, yes, it of course means access to technology, access to broadband, but it also means what you're saying in terms of, just look at us now. At least look at me. Like, I'm blessed to be a director at Microsoft. I have great health care. Then you have essential workers who are on the streets trying to deliver food or packing grocery bags, not knowing when the next paycheck will come in, if it will cover enough. If they get COVID, quite frankly, it's not going to be good for them financially. It's already happening. Right, I can work from home. I am working from home. I'm blessed. I'm enjoying life relative to those who can't work from home and are called essential, which is nice. It's nice to be called essential, but then are you paying them properly? Is
Mm-hmm.
it, do they? Are we forgiving their debt? Are we at least allowing them to move up some type of chain or provide their children with economic security?
Just let's be honest, it's just lip service.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's clapping at 7 o'clock. Like, oh, that's wonderful. It's a thing that we do here in New York. We clap, and good. Let's clap. But then let's also like increase. I don't get too political. Let's increase tax base so we can invest in making sure everyone has a fair shot of being the best person they can be. I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. And in terms of the urban sprawl, I'm living in it with New York City, so you have really rich neighborhoods like Upper West Side. Um, that neighborhood has declined the most in terms of rent value because a lot of those folks may have already owned another place somewhere that's 2 hours away or an hour away. So they're all moving out. Those who are a bit more rich, let's just say those who've won at life, are moving out. However, you look at the data, a lot of people are moving in. So it's not a net loss for New York. There's actually a bit more people moving in overall with
Interesting.
this COVID, which is very interesting. They mentioned that was based on cell phone usage, all these different metrics that are beyond my head. But what I'm seeing there is that those who were banned from New York City just by cost alone, like I can never pay this much, those young, bold, interesting, daring folks / desperate folks are moving to New York City and moving to places where they could have never dreamed of. Like I'm seeing places that were 4,000 down to 2,000, which is still very expensive. But that does enable certain people to move in.
Mm-hmm.
They could lock it for 2 years and negotiate down to 1,700. 4,000 versus 1,700 in 2 years of security is divided by two. Things get a bit more reasonable ish. So I'm seeing like kind of like this blood transfusion of people who have won at life moving on, and then those who are kind of new and willing to take a chance on New York. It's good. I'm happy that those are getting that, but I'm sure Governor Cuomo would agree and other governors. That doesn't help our tax base the most, where you have very wealthy people leaving, so then they're not getting taxed. So New York State isn't able to tax those who are very wealthy. And of course, it's great that new folks are coming in, but they're not necessarily making the $5 million a year type of scenario. So it's the finances of a city, the finances of a state due to this shuffle are up in the air. We really don't know. I believe we're thinking of legalizing marijuana, then taxing it. That's going to be a revenue generation type of motion, and that's great for various reasons. But yeah, I don't think if anyone comes to us, I know the exact how we're going to. I would doubt them. Cities really need to reimagine what they are. Is there a way we can prevent health issues? Is there a way we can kind of create education systems that are inclusive and far more effective at a local level? Is there a way we can decrease, income inequality based on gender and race? Like if you, it's still true to this day. If you are an African American woman and you have a solid business plan and you go to a bank, you could. If you were a Caucasian dude, you're much higher chances of getting the money. And here's the sad part. Well, it's all sad, but so many studies have shown that actually African American women, their businesses are a bit more productive and a bit more profitable. So it's not even that economics can save us. I'm a strong believer in economics and the markets, but it's not clearly, even despite banks and loans and proving that if you give out loans to this lady, you're going to get a safer return. It's still something's breaking, something's not working. I don't know what. But then why is it that someone has to work 5 times as hard? It's not effective. It's not efficient. So these are the type of issues that cities and states really need to think about in order to make sure that we have healthy, happy, and then productive people. Like in order to increase that tax revenue base and in order to really be able to sustain ourselves for the future. Because right now it feels like everyone's just holding on to what we are or what we used to be and not really having the luxury to think about what we need to be for the next 10, 15, 20 years in that reimagined bucket where we're trying to be more effective. It sounds all doom and gloom, but I do believe there are better days. We do have the right people in New York City. This is make it a hyper local example. We have these amazing women of color that are producing a bunch of different businesses that will generate lots of jobs. It's just they don't get the money they need. So it's not like, oh, we need to generate and educate and empower. We got the people, we got the quality people, the quality ideas. We also have the money. We just need to connect the two.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, for me, it's just important to remember that decisions are made by people, and people are biased. Every single person holds about 1,000 biases, within them. And ultimately, saying something like the data supports that this is this is what happened, you get better returns. There's a difference between knowing that on a logical level and getting it at an emotional level and changing your behavior based on that. And unfortunately,
logic doesn't work.
People, a lot of people still have these like inherent biases.
Yeah.
But
absolutely. There's tons of research that shows that logic, even if you type this in your hopefully your Bing search, why doesn't logic work when convincing people, hit enter? There's a bazillion articles that show that being correct doesn't help winning over someone or changing their behavior. Just wild.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the things that I want to ask you is like, what do you think the changes are going to be over the next, say, 1 to 2 years with regards to some of the places that you work with?
For sure. So within government, I think there's going to be some massive investment for state and local governments from the federal government, from Congress. They're going to pass some bills that hopefully will range from $100 billion to $400 billion. With that money in the next 2 years, I really think that cities and governments and governors across America will have the capital needed to really transform their workforce. To really, step one is empower your employees. Step two is then transform your services or products. Really think about what public services are you trying to offer? What's the overlap? And the third thing is that cross collaboration. It drives me, I get it, but it still drives me mad to see 30, 40 different agencies doing, let's say, 15% of the same stuff, which is great. But if they can just put their fingers into a fist, they'll have a lot more impact. There's so much potential in delivering world-class services if they just worked a bit better. Like a real concrete example, hopefully in the next 2 years, we'll see in America where we'll pull together a lot of the data. We'll make a data lake where we can upload this into, let's say, some type of citizen engagement portal that will use Cognos services to basically have this happen. To say to Nelson, to you, let's say you want to go and get a fishing license. So you go on this wonderful portal, how do I get a fishing license? And it will recognize it's you. It will know that, and because you gave permission fully, it will know that you're a small business owner. It will also know that you qualify for 4 different grants across 15 different agencies because you're a small business owner. So not only will you get a fishing license, but you'll get a chatbot that pops up and says, you're halfway through the qualification of 4 different grants. They'll give you $20K. And we have access to an entrepreneur that works in their field that subscribe to the Smart Commerce Initiative, whatever. Click this to begin this process. So then you can go home with $20K and a fishing license. Like that, it doesn't sound so dramatic or, oh my God, the world's a better place. But you just took services that were being underutilized and now they're being used. You have more money that you're going to invest and grow your business in. And you got your fishing license. To me, that's transformational. And that's very doable in the next 1 to 2 years with the right funding, the right mindset, and of course, the right data estate.
So within that example, then, how do we make it so that we remove some of the biases that are present in the example that we just talked about? Black women in New York City, for example. How do we remove How do we give them the money that you were talking about?
So luckily, within government services, you would assume there'd be their goal is to give out as much money to the right people in order to get them up on their feet and running. But banks a bit more calculated in what they're doing. But I am seeing researchers work on AI to ironically detect human biases. So we often complain about AI being biased, which it is, definitely is. And we can clean the data state, make sure it's as neutral as possible so it's not doing harm, which is great. But then I also see some researchers at MIT, Microsoft Research, saying, could we run an AI application that just scans your decision making, builds trends, and then sends a report to yourself saying, hey, in the last 3 weeks, you approved loans at 100% to those who look like you and sound like you. You approved loans by 40% for those who don't look like you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be accusations. It's not going to trigger some warnings. It's just going to let you know. I think awareness is key in kind of battling that bias. I don't think everyone's sitting there thinking, Shaaz has a beard today, let's not give him money. It's a bit more nuanced than that. And if you simply know, and then there's also KPIs baked into this, and there's performance evaluations that are based on how equitable you are when you're dealing out government services to the right folks, that I hope that we could begin to measure the problem at a micro level and then tackle it and then try to solve it. So I think that's good. Again, this is not some mission impossible technology. Like this is quite doable in the next 1 or 2 years if we get the right investments from the federal government. And because right now, honestly, COVID has depleted a lot of resources for a lot of local governments. But once they get the money, there are a bunch of ways we can definitely throttle that bias and then ensure the right money gets to the right people.
So one of the things that I think would need to be present there, and you alluded to it a little bit, is these other things that are also like the performance reviews and things that are geared towards equity, basically. Because I've seen research, and again, I think it was a little while ago, that suggested that just being aware of your biases didn't actually change your biases. In some cases, it actually made it worse because you actually thought, "Hey, I'm aware of things. That makes me more confident in the other things that I'm doing," which is really, really interesting and kind of a little bit counterintuitive. So I think those other things are key.
Yeah, you have to change the KPIs in order to make sure they're like, at Microsoft, when I first joined, and we had performance reviews every few months rather than once a year. And again, coming from a management consulting background, it's all about optimizing your performance and showing that you blasted your 7 KPIs by 10x, giving a promotion. So I came in with that mentality. So this is what I've known. Back to the private sector I go. I used to work for government. Now I'm a bit of a censure, the Microsoft. I know this game, quote unquote. So I went in there. Here we go. Well, all KPIs 100%. And then my manager was like, "Wow, this is. I don't think I want to give you an opportunity to redo this again because this is not what we do at Microsoft." Like, "Oh, what do you mean?" And at a high level, there's 3 things we look at. There's, of course, what impact have you done by yourself? That's one thing. So you just did 1 out of 3. You maxed that 1 out of 3. Mathematically, that's not very good. The second thing we look at is how have you helped others? And the third thing we look at is what did you do with the help you got from others? Really interesting cycle. And that really changed my mindset. And also explained a lot of things. When I first joined at Microsoft, the first 6 months was amazing. Everyone was trying to help me. Everyone was giving me their best PowerPoints, unedited, editable. No PDF nonsense. Everyone's just dumping here. This was like close to $30 million tonight. Just take it. I'm like, why is everyone giving me their work and their IP? I'm so confused because in other parts of different companies and stuff, it's very more like knowledge is power, hoard it. Here's my IP, it's mine. And I was like, what? Now I understood it because then they can, based on me taking their IP, reimagining it, working with it, being inspired by it, and then going off and succeeding, then they can say, hey, I helped Shaaz to help this different government agency to do X, Y, Z. Right? And then he gets the credit, which is great. I get the credit. I could say, thanks to Bob's help, I was able to really empower this government agency to do 1, 2, and 3 within 2 weeks, not 5. So those basic KPI adjustments really helped Microsoft transform entirely, culturally speaking, in the last 5 years under Satya Nadella. And I will do a plug-in. Hit Refresh is a great book by him. I think it's free now at this point. It's on all your different, you can listen to it on whatever platform you choose to listen to it. He really walks us through how did he hit refresh? What was the cultural change behind Microsoft? It was a very different culture 5 years ago, good or bad, up to interpretation. But now we're definitely a lot more of the, sharing knowledge, learning and growing. And I think maybe those are some lessons that whether you're a small business owner or you're a VP at Goldman Sachs, whoever you are, I think those are some lessons you can take and really help. And those small nudges, I think there's a book called Nudges that's based on like how you make those biases. It really made a difference at Microsoft. And not that I care about stocks, very frankly, but I mean, they were averaging around 44 for like a long time, $44 roughly. Now it's 200 plus, surging and all that fun stuff. Mm-hmm. So caring about people, being empathetic, building that into a process in your business flow, in your quarterly business, it really does help the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, and we're going to wrap this up very soon, I could talk to you for hours, Shaaz, and probably will at a later date.
I love it.
I'm going to bore your ears off. But for me, it's about understanding the incentives and then aligning them. So with Microsoft there's a great example. They understood that having the value was in sharing. It was in collaboration. Other people had already created these fantastic resources where in other organizations they might have hoarded them because they were worried about you succeeding instead of them. In Microsoft, they've actually aligned the incentives so you're kind of incentivized to share and not just to kind of be okay about, okay, maybe Shaaz can use this, that's fine, but to actively encourage them to share and to reward them because of so. So I think that's really interesting. Well, Shaaz, I think that's a fantastic place to leave things. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I think everyone will have really enjoyed that. So that's Shaaz Nasir on the future of work. Shaaz, where can people find you if they want to learn a little bit more?
Sure, absolutely. You can add me on LinkedIn. I'm sure the links will be provided. LinkedIn is a great source. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Shaaztastic, 2 A's.
So that's Shaaz Nasir on LinkedIn. And as you mentioned, all of those resources and links will be included. Shaaz, thank you again and speak soon.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
And that's it for today. You've been listening to the Working From Home podcast with me, Nelson Jordan. We've been talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly side of remote work. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you've enjoyed the time you've spent with us today. If you'd like to discuss the podcast, you want to make a new friend, or you're interested in working with me on a copywriting or digital marketing project, then visit nelson-jordan.com. That's nelson-jordan.com, where you can also sign up to my newsletter to hear about this podcast and other exciting projects. Until next week, goodbye.